Hi, I'm Jerry Portwood, the host of the Queer Love podcast, and I have two very special guests joining me today. If you aren't aware of the photo book Loving, it was published in 2020 amid the pandemic and became a phenomenon. It's subtitled A Photographic History of Men in Love and shows hundreds of men from the 1850s to the 1950s in various situations. We have 19th century working class guys, fashionably dressed businessmen, farmers, university students, soldiers, sailors, and many more men in romantic settings at the beach, outdoors with friends, under umbrellas, dancing in groups, and staged with props. Hugh, Nini, and Neal Treadwell began collecting vintage vernacular photographs of men in love 25 years ago and now have amassed over 4,000. I'm so happy to have them join me today to talk about their collection and the forthcoming second edition, Loving 2, which features 300 photos for people to enjoy. Hi, Neal.
Hey, Jerry. Nice to be on.
Hi, Hugh. Thanks for being here.
Hello. Thank you for having us.
So I am really excited to finally talk to you because I saw the book in 2020. I wrote about it when I was at Rolling Stone. I was really moved by it. And then since then, it's become this huge thing. I mean, it's now in multiple languages. You've had museum exhibitions. I know you guys have called it an accidental collection, and now it's become your life work. Tell me about that.
Yeah, we do call it our accidental collection because it was not something that we did consciously in the early years, which would have been the early 2000s. And, we reached a point around the 15th or 16th year where we decided, or we came to the realization anyway, that the collection that we had amassed quite unconsciously was something that was probably important to somebody besides us and that we needed to publish it. And that's how the book came about. And since then, yes, the book did very well. It's still doing very well, as a matter of fact. And we had our first museum exhibition in 2023 in Geneva, Switzerland at the Museerat. And we are now launching a nationwide exhibition in Australia beginning this December.
Oh, very cool. I didn't know about that one. I still haven't seen these images in person. I've seen them in the book, and I've now seen the images for the second book. I don't want to go into the origin story because I know you guys have talked about that hundreds of times. I mean, everyone can find out about how you found your first photo and how you started collecting. But I know since then, you've also started collecting stories from people who've been moved by the book and their testimonies and their testaments. So tell me a little bit about that and why you think that has become such an important part of this project.
Well, when we launched the book, we didn't know what type of effect it would really have on anyone. And really through people who purchased the book, who found us on social media and even emailing us, have told us how the book has moved them, how it affected their lives. I mean, we started collecting the photos. We saw them one at a time. We have them here. We live with them. And we didn't know how people would take it, seeing all of them at once. And when you open the book and you have 350 or 320 plus photographs that you're going through, a lot of the comments were it was too emotional, too much for me to take in all at once. I really had to go through the book slow. We also received a lot of messages from people who received the books from family, and it was a connection that was used from mothers to their sons or grandparents to their grandchildren, just showing how much they cared and how much they loved them. And it was a great connection piece between families and friends.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking about since I first saw the book is how most of us are raised by heterosexual parents, by straight parents. And we obviously have photo albums of our biological families, but in some ways this book seems to function as like a photo album of our gay ancestors, of our queer ancestors. And it becomes so moving because even though we don't know these people, they're anonymous, we sort of recognize something and see them as part of us. What do you think about that?
Well, we agree with that. I can recall back to the time when we found our very first photograph. And, part of the reason that it appealed to us is that we felt like we were looking at somebody that we knew, like they were in some way our ancestors, even though we didn't know who they were. There were no names on the back of the photograph. And, but there was a connection there that we felt immediately. And we feel that with all of the photographs. I can't explain that any more than just to say that we had that same sensation in viewing our photographs.
So I know you guys have talked about seeing love in the eyes of the guys and that you have a 50-50 rule. Tell us a little bit about this feeling, because I know people have pushed back against it and said, these could just be friends, and tell me a little bit about that.
We call it the unmistakable look that two people have when they're in love. Because when you're around your friends and just hanging out and having a good time, everyone knows you. But when you've met that special person, it just puts a spark into your life, into your eyes, and they can see it. It's something that you really can't hide because it just shines through you. And with some of the photos, or with the photos that we have in the book, that's what you see. You see that unmistakable look of love or affection that someone has when they're in love with someone else.
Yeah, we call it the look that you can't fake if you're not feeling it, and you can't hide if you are.
And yet there are some photos where guys are hiding their faces, and you have those in the new book, and you kind of collect those together. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it's a pattern we started to see before we published the first book, but we weren't sure at that point what we were looking at. And it became very clear that there was there were couples who wanted to have the photograph. They didn't want to be able to be identified through the photograph, though. So when the photograph was taken, they turned their heads away from the camera. There were all sorts of inventive things. There's one photograph we have where it's only from the neck down, but their legs are very intimately entwined. They're fully clothed. It's a photograph taken outdoors. And what we surmised from that is that these couples wanted to do it risk-free as much as possible. And at the same time, when they held the photograph together, they would look at it and they would know that it's them. They would know that they, what they felt for one another. And they didn't need to see their faces to know that they were the ones in the photograph. And then nobody else would be able to identify them. And so there was a safety measure there.
It is actually a really powerful page in the new book, seeing that photo. There's another one that I wanted to talk about that I think is going to make a lot of people choke up. And it actually shows a young man and a smiling little little girl being pushed in a wheelbarrow. And you guys have also given the back of the photo, which says, "My boyfriend pushing Shirley and I in the wheelbarrow, some picture." Now tell us about that one.
I'm trying to think when we collected it. It was such a shock because you see the look in people's eyes with the big smiles on their face, and then you see the reverse and you see the writing that's on the back. I mean, my eyes started to tear up a little bit when you're saying it because it's that extra special note, that extra special surprise that you have with these photos that you get. It's so meaningful. And they were able to share that, whether it's the family that was looking at the photo or maybe it was just between the two of them. But it meant a lot to them because it's survived all of these years and been passed along.
Yeah, in that photo, it's a young man sitting in a wheelbarrow with a female toddler in his lap, and behind the wheelbarrow is his boyfriend pushing them. And you would look at the photograph and not think anything. I think we would have looked at the photograph even without the inscription and intuited that there was something else going on there. The guy sitting in the wheelbarrow wrote on the back, yes, I'm remembering this now, "Shirley and I being pushed by my boyfriend." First of all, the use of the word boyfriend, and the photo was probably taken in the late 19-teens or 20s, I think, and that term was their vernacular for we're in a relationship or boyfriends. That's something we think we are doing today for the first time, but in fact, we're not.
Yeah, they're on a farm. I mean, there's an emotion you get from it, especially the way you've displayed it on the page, but also I think part of it is we immediately think, but isn't this dangerous? Right? Because what if a mom gets it and then something happens, or what if a police, what if it's used as a weapon? And you guys have had that question often, like, how do these photos be, they people protected them, but they also could be dangerous.
For sure. It's never been ideal to be gay in any culture, in any space of time. However, we do think, based on what we see in our collection, that we need to revisit this notion that it was so much worse back then than it is now, especially during the time this photograph was taken. We look at between the 1890s and the 1920s, people were much more open and displayed their affection more freely. And there seemed to be more of a live and let live attitude about people who are gay and in relationships. And that changed for different reasons after the 1920s. But that era stands out as a time when it was a lot freer. Today, Neil and I are married. That wouldn't have been possible back then. However, there's a anti-gay industrial complex that works around the clock trying to discriminate against us that did not exist back then. So we're kind of living in the best of times and the worst of times today. And the worst of times in that it seems to us, that it's much worse in that regard today than it was back then. Back then, it was never a sermon on Sunday afternoon. It was never a political movement. It was never, you just didn't have the infrastructure to discriminate back then the way we do today.
Yeah, I think that's important to always remind people. We've done enough research now that we know that things actually kind of got better and worse after World War II.
Yes, right.
So I wanted to mention another image that you also shared the back, because you didn't really share the backs in the first book. And that's a new thing that you talk about why you did that, which I think is really fascinating. Another of these two, cute young men, probably in the early 20th century. And on the back, it says, Dandy Uncle Declan and his boy, homosexual. Now tell me about that.
It was a good kind of chuckle because they used the word boy homosexual in it. But obviously it was someone else in the family that loved their uncle and kept the photo and, put it on there. And, homosexual was just the word that was used back in that time. So it wasn't meant any way other than, that was her uncle or his uncle's boyfriend, lover, homosexual boyfriend.
Yeah. It may not have been a fawning inscription, but it wasn't, it doesn't come off to us anyway as being, a slur or anything like that. That's just the way this guy was described, his boy homosexual. And there's the word homosexual being used in a vernacular way, freely by people just to describe someone who is gay.
So you guys mentioned that you have lived with these photos for so many years. You obviously continue to collect them. And I guess I started thinking about it, like when you have a collection like this and it's become so present in your life, it starts taking over. And I was curious, like, have you dreamed about the photos? Like, have you had fantasies about the photos? I know you've written a screenplay imagining stories. So tell me about that. I want to know, like, how they've been, like, gotten into your brain and you can't not think about them.
Well, just to touch back a little bit, the screenplay that we've written is actually not made up. It's the true stories from the book. There's only one, but it's a hell of a story. And it's about two World War II soldiers in our book who crossed paths in 1945 in Germany at Dachau concentration camp with a royal gay couple from Germany, Prince Friedrich Leopold and Baron Fritz Cherini. And if you're going to have only one story out of 4,000 photographs and 25 years of collecting, it's a heck of a story to have. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the first part of your question.
Oh, well, I was just curious about how these guys are in your brain. Like, have you had like dreams about them, nightmares?
Yes. Not nightmares, but go ahead, honey.
Well, I think we just dream of the photos, or I do, just more of, wondering when we were putting together the first book and you're looking at them over and over and trying to decide which ones go in the book. That's all that's in your brain, in your mind. And so you wake up thinking about the photos and then going back and looking at them again and just, thinking in your head, what are the stories behind these photos? Yeah. How did they live? How much were they able to interact in their community? And then you look at the photos, you're like going, wait, someone had to take this photo. And so you start creating stories in your head about, how many friends did they have? Who was this that took the photo? Like the one, my uncle and his boyfriend, homosexual. Someone took that photograph and they kept it. So you try and think of those stories, and it always becomes it's always a positive feeling. Never a nightmare.
It's also true that, well, I'm sure you've had nightmares about fires or people stealing them or something like that.
Yes.
But there are so many really wonderful shots also, though, where you see people with their friends, you see people in settings that you wouldn't expect. It's not all secret. It's not all in the cloak and dagger shadow of night. Like you have like big groups of people. You have guys dancing with a bunch of people and things like that. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I am curious. I know that you have written about the diversity question you've gotten, and you have been able to collect more of Black men. And when we're talking about this being a photo album, I know that's what people are looking for. They're trying to find themselves, right? Tell us a little bit about the difficulty you've had, and it's mainly been like white European centric men.
Right. Well, our collection is mainly in from the United States, but we do have many photographs, hundreds and hundreds of photographs from all over the world as well. And those are included in both books. However, here in the United States, between the 1850s and the 1950s, slavery still existed in the South until, well, they say it ended in 1865, but we know that the Jim Crow South extended that 100 years more. And so in finding photographs of African-American couples, we just never saw them. I mean, we collected all of the photographs that we ever came across, but that was so few in number, unfortunately. So, people thought we had, selected our collection that way. It's not true. In fact, we had, I think, 10 photos of African-American couples going into the first book. Of those 10, because these are all taken, not just their photos, but everybody's photos are taken by amateurs. And oftentimes the resolution or the photo is blurry or something like that is not strong enough to go into a book. And that happened with all of our photographs, including the 10 of African-American couples that we had. And of those 10, only 2 had sufficient quality to go into the book. And that's why there was 2 in the first book. I think we have 3 new ones or 4 or 5 new ones. I don't remember the count. We put whatever we could in there. We put photos of any couple of any race or complexion or whatever into our book, regardless of those features, if those photos expressed the romantic love that we look for in our photographs.
You also have different gender expressions, and I think that wasn't really in the first book, but you have men that are dressed in women's clothing, and yet you're very careful not to call them trans because we don't know. Tell me a little bit about that. That's a new inclusion. We
had a couple when we launched book 1, but we chose not to put them in just because we were trying to stay within a certain parameter. But we did want to add them this time because there is that love that you see in the photographs. And as you said, we don't know if they're transgender. It's like the photographs that we have, we don't say if they're gay or homosexual. We say they're men in love. And so with these photos, we just see the affection that's there, and we felt it was important to include those photos we had in the book and Loving Too. The other part, I want to switch a little bit and talk about your guys' relationship, because I think it's also pretty profound and important to acknowledge that you've been together for over 3 decades and that you're now this public face, right? You've been on TV shows, you've been in interviews, you've done all of this. That's an important thing as well, that you've decided to take that on, because not everybody wants to do that. So tell me a little bit about how you met and like how you decided, okay, we're gonna go out into the world and be an out and proud married couple.
We met in a bar in 1992. We used to be so embarrassed about that story, but it's actually enough time has gone by and enough things are so different today that it's actually kind of a romantic story. Neal actually approached me, which was so brave of him. We're both pretty shy people, but I think I'm a little more shy than he is. So I first saw him, we were on the dance floor. He was dancing with a friend of mine, but we didn't know each other. And I could see his eyes over our friend David's shoulder. And when he would back up, his face sparkled. I didn't realize he had braces on from the lights, but that's what it was. Anyway, he left the dance floor, and I went shortly after to see if I could find him. I stopped, introduced myself, and I was a little embarrassed in a way. I don't know why, but I said, I'll be back. And then I just disappeared. And what I was doing as I went, that's when you would have the little calling card. You could write your name and number on a card. And so when I came back by, I slipped it into his back pocket and kept walking. I didn't know what had happened. I just felt something touch me in the back. And I kind of turned around to give whoever it was a piece of my mind. And I saw him walking off, and I thought, oh, I'm going to let that go, And I didn't know that he'd put his phone number in my back pocket until I got home that night, was emptying my pockets, and found this little piece of paper with his name and a phone number written on it. At least I assumed it was him. I was backtracking and thinking, okay, I think that was that guy that introduced himself to me, and he slipped this in my back pocket. So it was a couple weeks later that I called him and asked him out on a date. And, that began this 34-year journey that we've been on.
I mean, I will say, Neil, I've been given a lot of phone numbers on scraps of paper before, but never that way. So you're lucky that it works.
Exactly.
I actually collected a lot of them. I have a box full of them because, as you said, so much has changed. No one knows that, like when you were at a bar, people would write it on like a little match thing or give you these scraps of paper. And not that I was that popular, but I did keep the scraps, and I'm going to do something with it one day.
You should do a book.
Not that many, but yeah. I mean, you guys have obviously we've talked about this, feeling of seeing love in people's eyes. So I'm curious, how do you think about love? Like, how do you define it? What is it? It's always a difficult question, but like some people think of love as that spark that, happens at that moment where you see somebody and that love at first sight. And other people talk about, the fact that it's something over duration tell me a little bit of how you guys have thought of it.
I think there is love at first sight, but once you have that love, no matter what, it doesn't disappear. My heart still races every once in a while.
Mm-hmm, mine too.
When we're together, or when I see them, or if I've been on a trip and come back, I can't wait to be back. And I think it's always there. I mean, I assume people see, that sparkle in my eye when I look at you, and we still sit like little kids on the sofa and giggle about, things that happen during the day, and sometimes cry about things that happen during the day as well. Yeah. But 33 years, still going strong, and he's my best friend, and I love him to death.
Yeah, you said, is it love at first sight, or is it the long duration of something that you built? And I think the answer is that it's both. I definitely felt like I fell in love with him when I saw him, not in the bar, but like on that first date. And he felt the same way. And of course, you're having those really intense feelings about somebody that you do not know at all. But what we can say is that those feelings have endured. Neil said 33 years. We're actually in our 34th year. So just getting our story straight here.
I was waiting for that. I knew you were going to correct him.
Well, don't say it that way, please. That's the way it is, isn't it?
Somebody has to.
No. That feeling that I felt when I first, really met him on that first date has endured all that time. It's never diminished. And it's just, and the interesting thing about it is, if I may, when you meet somebody and you feel that way, in your heart, you hope that this is going to last forever. But in your brain, you wonder, what is forever going to be like? Are we going to get, 20 years into it? Or let's go even more modest than that. Are we going to get 10 years into it and then just sort of be complacent with one another? Are we just going to have built such familiarity that it's too comfortable to leave, but there's really not love there anymore, and you just keep going regardless? And for us, and I hope for anybody, that feeling has just grown stronger and bigger. And when we first met each other, we loved each other with everything we had, but what we have today is more than that. The space for love is bigger in our hearts than it was when we first met. And so even though the feeling is intense as it was in the beginning, there's a greater amount of it because, there's an expansion within yourself of what that capacity is. And that's where we are today.
Well, I love that you had the optimism to even say 10 years, because I do remember in the 90s, we were often told that our relationships wouldn't last more than 10 days. So
yeah,
I do think, though, that you guys have become this sort of, I'll just say poster boys, even though obviously we're older than boys, but poster boys for love. And so what is that responsibility like?
Oh, I don't know that, I don't think we ever thought of ourselves like that, but, I guess we have been together a very long time, and I don't know how common or uncommon that is. I would say for any couple of any gender makeup, it's probably, a long time. And so in that regard alone, I would think people would say, well, I wonder what they did to be together for so long. And it wasn't that difficult for us. We heard a comedian once talking about her marriage to her husband. And she said the secret to their long marriage, which was 18 years at that point, was never to be an asshole. And there's a lot of wisdom in that. And we really work hard not to do that. You don't, there's also another saying that you don't shit where you eat. And so we don't shit in our relationship as much as possible. So yeah, that's some of it. And then we also just love each other a whole lot.
You're both from Texas, right?
Yes. Right.
Yeah, so I'm sure you have lots of phrases. I'm from the South as well, and our producer Daniel is as well. So I always love collecting all the Southernisms, and that's the one everybody now uses. But there's a lot of other other great ones, I'm sure. Oh, you said "don't shit where you eat." That's not just a Southern one, but I have several others. I dated a guy from Alabama, and he used to say, "You need to squat that frog and hop you another one," which was like, you need to get a new idea, which I loved. Although my favorite one that I use all the time and I try to educate everyone on is that someone's rode hard and put away wet.
That's a good one, yeah.
So I think one thing that I'm really curious about, and I ask a lot of people because, growing up gay in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even some parts of the 2000s, we didn't have a lot of cultural images of gay men in love. And I think the fact that you guys have created these two books, one of the reasons why it's affected people so much is because they can see something that they didn't know was possible. So first, I'm just curious, did you have any pivotal kind of pop culture or cultural moments that you remember, either in media or books or anything? And then we'll talk about the second part. But first, I'm curious about, did you have anything that influenced you guys? Any images that you remember, I can have that?
No.
Well, actually, I was thinking about it,
okay.
and I was thinking about what other people have, and some of the positive influences. There was the movie Making Love. I don't know if that it influenced me so much, but I just remember I was just getting out of high school when I first saw it on HBO. And when your parents would go into the room, you'd change the channel really fast. But just to see the interaction of, sorry, I get a little teared up, of them, because there actually was some love between the two. And I was like, oh, wow, I would love to have that. And, so there was that type of experience. I couldn't think of anything else because, as you said, there was nothing there. I mean, Brokeback Mountain came out 20 years ago, but we were already, 15 years into our relationship at that point, or I can't do the math, but close enough.
Something like that.
And then there's so many, as you say, pop culture shows, but for so many years you had positive gay characters, but they weren't in relationships. So it didn't really show that you could have a relationship and become a couple and it would last forever. We have got a lot of comments from people who've received the book that reach out to us on social media saying that, and people in their 60s, 70s like us, or in their 80s saying, I wish I had something like this when I grew up because it would have been a positive reinforcement for me and I wouldn't have missed out on so many years of not having someone in my life.
I mean, the photos of the guys with the crescent moons are so adorable. And of course, the ones of the men holding the sign that reads "Not married, but willing to be," which is the cover of the new book.
Mm-hmm.
When you found that photo, tell me how you reacted.
Well, when we found that photo, we had no inclination that we were ever going to do a book or anything like that. We just thought the photo was incredible. And there are 4 other photographs of this couple that go with that particular one. What struck us the most about that photograph is the prescience that this couple had in probably around 1900 to hold up this photo studio prop that's meant for a single young man saying, "Hey, ladies, I'm not married but willing to be." Hold it up together to say, we're not married to each other but we're willing to be. It's just mind-blowing. And it was actually considered for the cover of the first book, and we went with a different one instead. And so when book 2 came around, we thought, well, it has to be this one, and so now it is. But it's just mind blowing that these two young, they're very young. They look to be about 16 years old, but they're expressing something that is just innate within us, and that is to couple. And, the pinnacle of being coupled is to be married. And they were thinking that 120 years before it was a conversation, at least among the public. It wasn't a conversation then like it is today.
I think that that's a good place to ask you the next question, because as you said, 100-something years ago, people were still aspiring to couple or to be in a relationship or to get married. And yet I'm still shocked. One reason why I started the Queer Love Project is because I meet young people who still don't think it's possible. And yet, we're examples. You're showing examples throughout history of people who obviously felt like they could find each other. Do you have any type of advice for people when they say like, okay, yeah, sure, it worked for you, but it's never going to work for me, or it's impossible, or it's too hard?
What I hear and what I read through social media, I run our social media account, so I'm always on checking to see what people are saying, and then notes that come to us. And every once in a while, someone will say something about the relationship, and they use the word compromise. And I don't care for the word compromise because I feel like our story is, I grew up on a ranch. I grew up on the farm. Hugh is more of the arts with symphony and ballet. I had no clue about any of that when we got together. However, us being together, I wanted to know more. I mean, that was a part of him. We didn't really have that much in common other than I think we loved each other. But, so me learning about ballet and the difference between Vaganova and Balanchine, and I mean, I knew what I liked and what I didn't like, or, introduced me more into classical music, because when I went to college, music appreciation was the last thing I wanted to go through. But we've gone to symphonies, and I know that, the Romantic period is my favorite. And it wasn't a compromise for me to do something he wanted to do, was me bettering myself or learning something different, and him doing the same for us to grow. And that's what you continue to do, because you want to do things that you both enjoy. And sometimes, you may not enjoy the other, but it's a learning experience. And I mean, I've grown to appreciate, I may not love it as much as he does on some things, but I can appreciate it. And we have a great time sharing moments together like that.
And we wouldn't limit our comments to people who are younger than us. We would say that about anybody of any age, that this kind of love that we all dream about exists. It's real, and it is something that everybody can have. It may not come fast for you, but it can come. My aunt, at the age of 92, met the love of her life, and he was 94. They didn't have a lot of years together, but she was over 60 years in a marriage with a man that she hated. And when he died, she met somebody better, and they had a wonderful life together. She died when she was 98. I think he died a little bit before that, but it's just absolutely never too late, and it's worth every bit of fighting that you would need to do or have to do for it. We had struggles in our relationship. We don't regret any of those struggles. We overcame them, and, everything has been like clear sailing for 30 years. And that's it's been worth it. It was worth everything that we had to go through to be here today.
Neal, I love what you said about compromise. It's funny because my husband and I also argue about that word, because when I first met him, that's what I had learned was like, oh, you're supposed to compromise. And he was very much like, no, I'm about sacrifice. And he's like, sacrifice is something. He also grew up Catholic, which I didn't. I grew up Baptist, Southern Baptist. But I was like, oh, okay. But I got into a whole discussion with him because I was like, I don't want you to regret that you sacrificed something for me. He's like, no, this is about a commitment. And it's about, I will do things for you and you'll do things for me, but it doesn't always have to be a compromise. So that's interesting that you brought up that word, because I do think a lot of times people in relationships think, oh, that's what makes them work. But you're talking about more about imagination, being open, being willing to learn and to change, which I think is true.
Yes, exactly.
So, you guys are putting out the second book. I'm curious obviously people are going to love it, but like, what do you want them to get from the second version? What do you think is different? What do you think is adding to the conversation?
Well, the second book is a continuation of the first book in that the message is still the same. The photographs reveal romance and love between two men between the 1850s and 1950s. But what we did with book number 2 is that we branched out into some of the areas that we've mentioned so far that you brought up. The hidden faces, that's one. The photos of men who wear one, and in one case both of them present as female, still two, men, because they're taken back in the 1860s and 70s, and so there was no surgical option for a trans person back then. Not that everybody goes that route today anyway, but it's still, they're male. even if one presents as female, then we considered that a strong enough connection with our first collection to go ahead and put it in the second collection. And then also the verso that we put in the second book, which we didn't want to do any of these things in the first book simply because we wanted to keep the message very simple, very clean, and very crisp. And now that that's been established, we feel like we can do a little extra. With the verso, we show, what these men were thinking or feeling based on what they wrote on the backs of their photographs, and in some cases on the fronts of their photographs. And I think those are the different avenues that we went this time.
Well, I'm going to add one because I think you also got a little sexier. There's some very naked or semi-naked and sexy pictures as well.
That's right.
We call them flirty or playful.
Well, they're a little more than that, aren't they? Yeah.
And those are fascinating because, as people always say, like, who took them? But you also always think, oh, these had to be developed by a person who's at least open to, having these photos of some semi-nudity.
Like I said, with the first book, we wanted to keep the message very, very simple and very crisp. But in the second book, there's some nudity in the second book. But the thrust of the photo is still that it's romantic love between two men. We didn't want to, and we never collected photographs of sex. That's just not our thing. It's other people's things, and it's covered pretty well and has been covered pretty well over time. Our collection is about the emotion and not the physical act. Although we assume that the physical act is in the background there because, it is with us, and we assume that it is with others as well. But now that that's been established, we felt like we could, show a little ankle, I guess is what we would say.
It's true. They're flirty. And you can see a sort of joy that's also nice especially the amount of military and photos also, it lends itself to that. You have all this homo-erotic space or homo-social space that people are just having a good time.
Totally. Especially during World War II. I mean, the number of photographs that we have that are romantic between soldiers during World War II is just unbelievable. That there was a culture, a subculture, and it was pretty much well known by everybody. Not that everybody participated in it, but there was, gay men were able to meet each other for the first time in their lives when they came from little towns of 500 people in the middle of nowhere. They were brought together during World War II, and gay men were able to find each other easily.
Well, I hope people love Loving 2 as much as they loved the first one. It's out October 14th, and you can pre-order it now. Is there anything else that you want to tell people? I'm so happy that we finally got to talk about this.
Yeah, thank you for having us. We're glad to be here, and we loved your article in Rolling Stone that you wrote 5 years ago, I guess it was. But I think, the last thing I think we'd like to say is that we, fully support people's endeavors to experience romantic love with one another and to build lives together.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For everyone who's looking for Loving 2, it's out October 14th, and you can pre-order it now. And if you're a new listener to the Queer Love podcast and aren't already a subscriber to the Queer Love Project, you can find us on Substack. It's a platform where LGBTQ plus people share stories and experiences about whatever love means to them. We keep all our words free and publish original personal essays and interviews every week. So go to queerloveproject.substack.com and subscribe and support us today.